Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Thrivestry Podcast, Mastering the Art of Thriving at Life, where we talk about creating change in our lives and in the world around us. I'm your host, JJ. This is my co-host, Gigi. Say hi, Gigi.
Hi.
And we are going to today we're going to talk about the OODA Loop, OODA Loop, something that Colonel Boyd, you should read about his life, very interesting, fascinating fellow, came up with. He was a fighter pilot. He was undefeated in all his training runs when he was an instructor and everything. I think he had like 100 or 50 or plus dogfights where he was undefeated, and he developed this sort of concept, and I think it's been around a lot longer than him, but he articulated it really well around the observe, orient, decide, act. And we can use this as coaches and as humans to help us sort of shape our how we're going to pick our habits, what we're going to do when we're derailed, and kind of give us that, set up those plans. And then we're also going to talk about this really neat article about how our networks, our friends, and the people we're around affect our behaviors and even our thoughts. Is it mind control? I don't know. Maybe it is. Are we being controlled by other people around us? Is there something we should think about when this comes to our lives? Is free will a real thing? Stay tuned. So let me share this graphic I've got here. This is the OODA Loop graphic. So you can see that, right?
Yep.
So for you guys who are listening to the podcast, it's basically a circle and it's a loop. And at the top of it, you have observe and an arrow going clockwise. So that's the first step in the OODA Loop, the first O. And the idea is you need to observe kind of where you're at. And so this was originally kind of came to him when he was flying as a fighter pilot. And the idea is you need to observe where the ground is, where the opponent is, what are the conditions, what's your speed, what's their speed, that sort of thing. So you need to observe, you need to know where you're at. And so you'll hear us talk a lot about it when it comes to habits and even and change within ourselves. You got to know where you're at. Someone can hand you a map, but if you don't know where you are, the map is useless, right? And so I think this is where a lot of sort of recommendations we read on articles or programs we may download online, if they don't take into account kind of where you're at, your starting point, they're not going to be as effective, because ultimately, to get from point A to point B, you got to know where point A is. So in this case, in this little graphic, again, check out the YouTube video and you can see this graphic, and I'm sure I'll be sharing this on social media. But what is the situation? What is the real reason you want to change, and how bad do you want to change? And so the idea is if you're trying to change some habit or behavior or trying to get to some goal, you need to understand, again, where you're at and what's the real reason. Like, not just like, I want to lose weight. Why do you want to lose weight? Well, I feel fat. Well, why do you feel fat? Well, I don't like the way I look and I have all this fat on it. And you go down this path. I like to say the 5 whys, but you need to go down this path. And this tool is from an article I was writing for coaches. So if you guys were part of Thrivestry, you've already been sent this article. Someday I may make it public or part of another, type of download type of thing. But the idea is that you sit with your coach, or you as a coach sit with a person, and you get down to the real reason why. And the reason why that's so important is because if the why isn't really, if you're just kind of like, I don't know, I kind of want to just be skinnier, and it's not really that important to you, that's going to dictate how much effort you're going to put into it. And so we might then make some small changes, because you're not going to be really excited about making these huge changes if there's no real motivation. But if you're, if it's life or death, like if I don't make these changes, I'm going to die, then obviously we're going to be able to make bigger changes. Does that make sense, Gigi?
It makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
What do you think of this graphic? Is this graphic is good or better than yesterday, or not as good?
I think it's like apples and oranges, right? So last week's I hadn't seen it before, I guess, which was I really like the creative addition to play in the concept. If you didn't listen to last week's podcast, or if you don't know what we're talking about, please go and look it up, because it was really good. But this is not a new concept, this one, but I'm just staring at it and I'm thinking about all the different times in our life where we would benefit from following through this process. I think it's awesome.
Yeah. And I think the observe thing is something that we all forget to do because we're just going through our lives, our daily routines, and we get into these ruts, or we get into these cycles where we're not really paying attention to where we're at. And so, maybe we have been trying to make this change for weeks, months, or years, and you don't step back and go like, I've been trying to do this for years and it's not working. Where am I wrong? Is it my starting point? Is it, my next step? And so, stepping back to observe is really important. And then on a separate note, if you guys listened a couple weeks ago, I think we were talking about triggers, and one of the funnier ones we were talking about, and then we also talked about the power of groups and kind of having partners in crime when you do these things. And we mentioned that my wife tried the vegan thing for a week, and two interesting things came out of that, and that have continued on for the last few weeks. And one is that she said that I just realized I could eat a lot more vegetables, because when she was vegan, she had to get calories from vegetables. And so she opened up kind of her vegetable vocabulary, if you will, and was just trying new things. And so that's one of the big changes that has sustained. And then the other one was we got one of those, it's like it turns like zucchini and cucumbers into noodles. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. It's like the spiralizer thing, and it's like you stick the thing in, and then you crank the handle, and it turns. And they're actually really good. It's actually zucchini noodles are actually pretty palatable, and they basically, instead of trying to do gluten-free noodles or trying to always do rice cauliflower, if you want something that's a little bit more has a little bit more bulk to it, and is still super healthy with lots of fiber and not a lot of carbs, something to hold all those meat juices or sauces. Then definitely get that. So those are two things that came out of that experience. And that's another kind of separate topic. But a lot of times when we go down this little adventure, this little journey of trying to change our habits or behaviors, we may not, be a completely different person at the end, but you might have picked up a few things along the way. And then the next time you might pick up a few things, the next time. And then over time, all those small little tweaks and, life hacks, if you will then create, enormous change over time. So always be thinking about, after you create some new routine and maybe it didn't quite work out, but what did you learn and how did you get better? And so that could be considered part of the observe, right? You just finished some cycle and now you're observing, well, I observed that I could eat more vegetables, and how do I incorporate that into my life from now on? The second go ahead.
Sorry, can I add something to the observe piece? One of the biggest challenges as a coach, so either I coach business owners, or a coach who coach clients, or any of you out there that work in anything where you're really in a teaching position or something like that, a lot of the time getting your client to identify that observation, what is the situation, and being able to pull out some metrics and clearly define what is the actual situation. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten on the phone with someone or gotten into a meeting with someone and they're just beside themselves because they've kind of let their emotions take over it. And when I force them to really take a step back and observe and analyze their situation so that they can actually define what is really happening here, most of the time it's not as bad as they think. And I think that just getting that frame of mind and clearly defining the situation is so good to set you up for the next 3 steps in this loop. Because if you're just what is the situation? Well, I want to lose weight. It's okay, but how much do you want to lose it? Or how do you want to lose inches? Do you want to feel better? Do you want to have more energy? And defining that stuff. And I know that leads directly into orient, which is the next O. But I guess the point is that when you take that step back and actually observe it from the outside, you'll be able to really define it a lot better, and it'll set you up for better success than just basing it on I've got to change everything, I'm so frustrated.
Well, and that you're exactly right. I mean, I think most people, when it comes to a lot of the decisions in our life, they're just making snap decisions, and it's usually coming from an emotional base. And I think a lot of businesses are run this way. One week, two people happen to complain about something similar. Whether it's the music or we're talking about in the gym specifically, or we're doing too much lifting, or the schedule is not right, and you don't get a lot of feedback. So that all of a sudden, that squeaky wheel, you start like panicking and like, okay, we're going to make all these changes or whatever. And it's like, we need to step back and observe where we're really at here. Is this really a problem? And then you can go through this loop instead of just doing this like knee-jerk reaction. In our daily lives, it could be that, you had a bad day and you ate a bunch of bad food that you weren't planning on, and you feel like crap. So then the next day you're going to come in and punish yourself, and you're going to try to eat really clean. You're going to work out really hard, and it becomes this mentality of punishing yourself. When you step back and observe and say like, well, that was just one day, and then the last 3 days before that, I was really pretty good. Okay, so maybe tomorrow I'll just make sure that I eat a little bit cleaner and I stick to my training regimen, because that cycle of self-flagellation of like, I need to make up for it, I need to punish myself, is really hard on yourself emotionally and mentally, and it also leads to this sort of overtraining and then you end up swinging the pendulum the other way, and then you end up eating bad again, and it becomes this really bad cycle. So having that step back 10,000 foot, 20,000 foot view is really important. So the orient, the second O of the OODA loop, is okay. So now you know kind of where you're at, but you need to orient where you are relative to where you want to go. So how far is it to this? Is this a really big goal? Is this a really long range thing? Is it something that you've had in the past and you kind of have an idea of how to get there? Is it a complete change from what you've been doing? Are you going to be changing things that doing things you've never attempted or thought about doing? Those tend to be the kind of where we're at. We need to orient so we observe and we orient. We observe what the situation is, and then we orient ourselves kind of within that relative to the ultimate goal. And then the decide, right? Deciding is, okay, I need to decide on what to do, right? If you're a fighter pilot, guy's over there, he's going this fast, going that direction. I'm over here going this fast, going this direction. What do I need to do? What's going to be my decision? And then I need to make that decision and, make the plan of what I'm going to do. And then of course the next one's act. So one of the important points of this one is sort of, what's the path they're going to take? Sometimes, the goal is very clear and direct, but the path maybe have lots of setbacks, and you might need to go about things in a very different way. So for somebody who's trying to exercise more, because of their goal, they have this goal of, doing some event or just, being fitter and healthier, but they just have a really busy life, and they haven't really set up their schedule to allow some space to kind of create more time for activity and training. Then the decision might not be, I'm just going to work out more. The decision might actually be, well, actually, before I do anything else, I need to start creating space so that I can work out, and that's not a direct step towards your goal, but it's kind of clearing those obstacles or creating new routines that are going to help you achieve some progress toward your ultimate goal.
And I think that example you just gave is such a good incorporation of the orient and decide steps, right? Like you might not include that, to get from where you are to where you want to go means that you have to create this space. And I always like to use that term, creating space, in a lot of different ways. But, it's easy to say, I'm going to go to the gym on Monday. Right? Like that, like a lot of people are like, oh, I need to lose weight. I'm going to go to the gym on Monday. I'm going to start a diet on Monday. So they jump right to this decide phase without going through this entire process of like, okay, like, can I go to the gym? When I go to do I have running shoes? Do I have a gym membership? Do I enjoy my gym? Do I have music on my playlist? Like all of those roadblocks. Like when it talks about how you're going to handle challenges and setbacks, it's like, okay, where that has to do in my mind with like, where are you actually starting? Are you starting from a place where you don't enjoy it, where you have no one to hold you accountable, where you have no plan when you actually get there? All of that needs to be part of that deciding process, right? Like, and again, we use this all, like, I just love this because I use this all the time in my business consulting when people are like, I'm not making any money. And I'm like, okay, so let's look at your numbers. Where are you today? Where do you want to be? How much money do you want to be making? Like, what are your goals? And then we literally, like, I bring them through this exact process, right? what are your goals? And then how are we going to get there? And that will break down into literally like month by month, week by week, day by day, even hour by hour. How do you get from A to Z? Sometimes it's a 6-week plan. Sometimes it's a 6-month plan. Sometimes it's a 6-year plan, and it all depends on setting yourself from defining where you are now, defining where you want to be. And then this whole decide thing is how you're going to get there. And I love this. I think that it's so straightforward and it's not reactionary at all.
Yeah. It's proactive. And like, sometimes making that decision to do something like, I'm not going to let anything stop me. I'm just going to go to the gym on Monday. That's fine. But just realize that you're putting off the real work of saying, okay, like going to the gym once on a Monday with no plan and no real routine set up around that isn't going to help you long term. Like saying, but like saying, okay, I'm gonna go to the gym on Monday, and then in the meantime, I'm gonna figure out how I can make this a habit, and what's gonna be my routine, what's gonna be my triggers and my steps to get to make sure that this happens on a regular basis. Because doing one workout isn't really that beneficial. It's when you start stacking those up relatively close together for long periods of time that we see the benefits. Even training really hard for 5 years in a row and then taking a year off, even though you might have trained, 4 days a week for 5 years without missing a day, you take a whole year off, you're not going to be much better off than if you had spread that out over the 6 years or whatever. And so, consistency over time is really the key. And so this is the time though to sit there and figure out, okay, what's the smallest incremental step we can make that that's relative to how bad you want it, and also what's the plan, right? So like, what's the plan when something goes wrong? Okay, I'm going to go to the gym every Monday at this time. Okay, well, what if you can't go to the gym on Monday? Okay, well then I'm gonna do something at home, or I'm gonna make sure I go on Tuesday, or I'm gonna try to work out on the day before, or there's all you have to think of that stuff ahead of time. If you try to just wait until the moment and it just sort of falls apart, well then it's like, okay, no wonder why you failed. You don't have a good plan. You don't have a good, your decide part of this loop hasn't really been fleshed out like it should.
But I will say that, like, yes, I agree with everything you said, but I think that if it's easy for people to get caught up in the decide phase, right? Because it's when you plan to do something, it psychologically has a lot of the same effect of actually doing the thing, right? So like if you're planning a trip, right? It has.
We talked about this. Yeah. We talked about
this. I don't know if it's just you and I talked about this or if we actually recorded it in a podcast, but that's why we started this podcast, isn't it? So that we could share our thoughts. So if you're planning the gym and you're thinking about all the stuff that could go wrong and you're spending weeks trying to overcome all of this and planning out the best plan, then what you've done is you've lost weeks of action, right? So
yeah, so I think you just muted yourself, Gigi. Perfect, because I want to jump in anyway. Yeah, so sorry. Yeah, I don't know if you heard me, but I said I wanted to talk anyway. So, yes, we've talked about this in the past. And your brain, remember, there's always sort of a way to think of your brain as two separate sort of operating systems or two separate modes. One is the very thinking fast brain, and then there's the thinking slow brain. The thinking fast brain doesn't take a lot of energy to use. It is really good at taking in many, many different signals and information at the same time and making very good snap decisions or gut-based decisions. But this sort of starts to dominate most of us because using the real logical thought process part of our brain, it takes a lot more energy and it's not our default mode. And so this loop is basically forcing you to sit down and think this stuff through. But there's a trick to it, like you said, is sometimes when we sit down and we order the workout gear and we put a appointment on our calendar of this is when I'm going to work out, and we have all these plans, it almost tricks our brain into thinking that we did it. And so you have this sense of accomplishment and you feel like, all right, I got that done, check that off the list, but then you actually have to do the work. So and it's really true, and it's really true in just your life. Like sometimes there's all these efficiency and habit trackers or checklists and all these apps and articles and videos around being more efficient with your work and your life, and you get caught up in sort of reading all these things and doing all this organization, but you're not actually getting anything done, right?
Yeah.
And so that's a really good point about the decide part of the circle. So then after you've made the decision, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, but it's the reason why it's a loop, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about the act thing. And then I have a really good example of why it's an actual loop, why it doesn't stop. There's no start and finish. It just goes around and around and around, right? Because life is always about just improving your average, and this is a really good model to do that. So yeah, talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so act is is usually where we start the loop again. So we follow the plans and routines, we record progress is really important, and then report back, have some accountability. So you can either be reporting to yourself, so review kind of your notes and everything, or you're sending it to somebody else and you're going to sit down and have a conversation around that. Could be a friend, could be some sort of coach, but ultimately it's that you actually have to do the stuff that you said you were going to do. And that tracking is really important, because if it hasn't been working for the last few weeks and you haven't been tracking why, you're just sort of like, well, I think it was because of this, but that may not be true, right? Because you could just have this thing in your head that makes you think that was why it wasn't working, but it could actually be something completely different, that if you actually took notes, then you'd have a more realistic view, so that when you do the observe, orient, decide again, you can be more efficient, or be more correct, be more efficient, right, on the next round.
Yep, exactly. So if you're going to, we'll stick with the weight loss situation, right? Or the weight loss example. And again, life is always about improving your average. So you're allowed to make mistakes. You're allowed to improve your systems. You're allowed to fail and learn from it and move on, right? And that's, I think, what I'm taking out of this the most. So if you observe a problem and the problem is, I want to lose weight, then you're going to, define that. Okay, how much do you want to lose? Why is it important to you? Do you care enough to do that? And then you're going to orient yourself to, where do you want to go? How far is the way? Which again gets back to the definition, right? So say you want to lose 10 pounds, okay? Just a normal thing. The path that you're going to take. Well, I'm going to lose it by not eating sugar and going to the gym 3 times a week. Okay, cool. So then you start your act, and then you are recording your progress and you're checking back and all that kind of stuff. And at the end of a month, you realize that you didn't actually stop eating sugar and you only went to the gym 3 times that month instead of 3 times in a week. And this is not an extreme example. This is the stuff that people go through every single day, right? And everyone has their own reasons. But the trick is to keep going, right? So you go to act, and then you go back again to observe. Okay, so what is the situation? The situation is that I still want to lose 10 pounds. I've done this plan. It didn't work. What didn't work about it? It didn't work because the gym is an hour out of my way to go to whatever, right? It doesn't work with my schedule. I had too much stuff come up with my kids. I had to finish all the junk food in my house before I could cut it out, right? So
yes.
Right? So then you're going back into the loop again, right? So you didn't have success the first time, but it doesn't mean that you stop. It means that you keep going around that loop and keep going through that observe, orient, decide, act process, and improve that average a little bit and learn those lessons every single time, and eventually just build the best habits that actually work for you.
And I think to your point, I think a lot of people will say, okay, I'm going to cut out sugar and go to the gym 3 times per week. And then they're at the end of a month or two, they're like, it didn't work. I must have a thyroid issue. It's genetic. The workout program didn't work. People start making up all these excuses or reasons, and it may not be totally unfounded, but at the same time, without actually looking at what you really did, you're actually I only averaged 2 times per week because I missed a whole week in the middle. And then I wasn't really reading labels, so I didn't realize that spaghetti sauce is full of sugar and these other things have all this sugar that I wasn't really paying attention to. And I always ate whatever I wanted on Sundays. And it's okay, well, maybe, the program might not have worked for you, but now let's tweak it so that it can work for you on the next time. So we're going to observe how the last action, what its results were. Or somebody might have done it and had relatively good results, but then say I can't sustain this. whatever we planned is just way too much work for me. I know I'm not going to be able to keep this going. And so then again, sitting back and trying to figure out what works for your lifestyle and your tastes, especially if you're working with somebody who kind of knows this sort of thing like a coach, then they're going to be able to say, well, how about we try this instead? Or can we tweak this? Or, we can work around just about anything.
That's what I was going to say too, is that I think a lot of humans that are not in the fitness industry, like I know we take for granted a lot of the time that we've been in the industry for so long, and we forget that most people, 90%, 95% of people don't know what we know. So for you and I to go through this process and we kind of know, like, okay, here's a trigger, like, here's where I fail. We can identify that stuff because we live and breathe this all the time. But for most people, they don't. And that's why a coach is so important to have, right? Yeah. Like having a coach, having that person in your corner, they're basically going to bring you through this loop, right? And that's it. It's like, hey, yeah. I didn't see your workouts recorded. Why didn't you do the workouts? Well, my kid had the flu, or we did this, or we did this. Okay, great. So here's where we are. Here's what we're going to do. Like, I'm going to give you some at-home workouts. I'm going to give you, one of my coaches, the best thing that he told me is that I used to skip workouts when I didn't sleep, when I had a newborn, right? So you're not always getting enough sleep. And for me, I don't like to work out unless I've had at least 6 hours of sleep. Like weightlifting, I don't like to do weightlifting. Like I could go for a swim or a run or something, but I'm not going to lift weights unless I've had 6 hours of continuous sleep. It's just a safety thing. And he's like, okay, so on those nights, instead of working out, what are you doing? And I'm like, nothing. I just kind of dick around on my phone, or like I try to get into work, but I'm tired. And he's like, okay. So like the loop wasn't improving anything because all I was doing was not sleeping and not working out. And then, usually ended up intaking too many calories that day or whatever, right? So he's like, instead of working out, the new decision based on all of the act and the orient and observe stuff is to take a nap. So all those times, like instead of working out, you're going to take that time and you're going to have a nap. And I was like, oh my God, that's fucking genius. Right? Like,
I'm getting told to take a nap. I love it.
He's making me into a nap person. It's true.
Yeah. So this is another graphic I'm sharing for you guys listening in. This comes from The Power of Habit and the Habit Loop. And there's the trigger, the routine, and the reward. And one of the things that he did was he kind of took the sort of the OODA Loop. I don't know if he followed this. There's also something called the Kairos Circle, which is something that I learned from like church stuff. And there's all these examples of this loop, this loop that we're talking about. But so you go through what's the reminder to make you do it? Like I said, you're leaving work and you're driving to the gym. You always go past the gym on the way home, for whatever, to make sure that you're getting your training in. And then what's the routine? The routine is I'm going to drive to the gym and do a class. But then, okay, there's a broken routine. So what went wrong? There's the observe, reflect, plan, act, I think is the words he used. So that would be observe, orient, decide, act, right? So, but what he was really adamant about in the book was the research shows that if you just have these backup plans, like taking a nap instead, or doing something else where at least you're doing something, right? Instead of just feeling like a failure or whatever, like your reminder is, okay, when I come home, I'm not going to just automatically have a snack, and so that's like the trigger. And then you're like, oh, I ended up eating a bunch of chips because they were on the counter and I was really hungry today. And then it's like, okay, well, what happens when you do that? Well, I'm also going to eat some protein to sort of blunt the insulin response and maybe not absorb those carbs as fast. And even though you're eating more food, you'll actually fill up a little faster because now you're getting some protein, maybe a little bit of fat too. And so that's like a good, backup plan, and then you could have a backup plan of the backup plan. And so you want to observe what went wrong. Well, why was I so hungry today? Well, I didn't eat a good lunch and, the chips got left out. I shouldn't have those where I'm going to see them. So my plan is going to be next time I want to make sure I make these plans, and then you go back into the act, right? And then of course there is a reward part of the original loop. So the reminder, the trigger, the routine, and then the reward. There should be some sort of reinforcement thing that you go through. So that was just another graphic. The top of this is just kind of like it's an example of a mountain. And so you actually start at the top. What's the goal? What are the checkpoints for the goal? What are your weekly habits? What obstacles do you need to remove? And then, then you actually start the OODA Loop. So this is just another one of the tools we use with Thrivestry to help coaches and people achieve their goals and create change in their lives and in the world around them. So if you have more questions around this stuff, like I said, you can post stuff to comments, or you can always message me, jj@thrivestry.com. And then again, a lot of this stuff exists for the subscribers and, on the Thrivestry site. But if you're really interested in learning more about this stuff, I do plan on putting a lot of these things into a course that you can get access to. So let's talk about this article. This really fascinating article this one I found. How your friends change your habits for better or for worse. And it's really not just about your habits. It's about how you think in everything that you do. So this was just put out earlier this week here in May. And it really is just kind of pulling together some different studies and examples that how you think your self-control and you think your decisions are all within you, but you really discredit the amount of how much influence the people around you have. And everyone thinks like, oh, I would have acted differently in that scenario or whatever, but they don't realize that in the moment, especially when other people are acting a certain way, you tend to gravitate toward that. I found it really, some of the examples really interesting. I know, Gigi, you were saying about the likes. What were you saying about the social media likes?
Oh, so I'm in Canada, and they use Canada a lot of the time for test groups because we're like a nice, small, manageable population. So Instagram has actually changed their algorithm up here so that when you like something, you can't, or when you're scrolling or whatever, it doesn't say how many people have liked it. So it's got the little heart, and it will say like if one of your friends, so if it was something from Precision Nutrition and I'm scrolling through and I saw, it would say Jeremy Jones and others have liked this, as opposed to Jeremy Jones and 2,500,909,023 people have liked this, right? So and that was the first example that came to mind when I was reading through this article, is the practical applications of how like we're actually manipulating people through the likes and shares concept, right? So if you know how many, millions or thousands of other people have liked something, you're probably more likely to like it yourself, right? Because you can tell that it's popular and you're like, yeah, I like this. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Whereas I think it creates more of an honest reflection of what people truly like without being able to see that total number.
Yeah, I think it could be a step in the right direction, because so many people get attached to that, when they post something that they enjoy, and they're constantly checking back to see how many likes and comments and shares it got or whatever. And I think that can kind of take some of that out of it. You can still see it as you're on your own post if you go in there and you can look at it, but it's a few more clicks, I guess. But again, it becomes less about like the popularity of the thing. Obviously, the algorithm's still paying attention to that, but they're just not putting it in everyone else's face. So then you may not realize it, but you're more likely to hit like when thousands of people have already hit like on it. And so what the study that they did here was they had people coming through like a lunch line, and they sort of put all these benefits up of, this is the healthier options, and it didn't change anyone's behavior. But when they actually listed, this is the most popular dish, and it was like a vegetable dish, the most people, I think it was the exact number of people have already bought this, more people bought it. And then when they took that away, people still continue to buy that item after the fact, right? So we know that without input, or just health input information, didn't tickle that fast thinking brain. But a lot of other people like this, well, it must be good, that I'm gonna get that.
Yeah, and I thought that was actually the only example, or the only piece of the study that I didn't find had the same. I didn't think that it had the same sociological impact as the other ones, right? And I was reading through it, I was like, I don't think that I can see why they would have included this in the same report, but I don't think that it's the same mechanism. When we're talking about like why you do that. Because if you're at a restaurant, or if you're in line for food or whatever, and you're trying to decide what to get, it's a pretty safe bet to get the thing that everybody else gets, right? Like it is. And that's a more of a conscious decision-making thing, as opposed to, say, the example that they were talking about with the environment. And so this was a really super cool study. They had some university students that were in the room, and there was basically some other like older people that were in the room with them, and they were having a discussion about the environment. And if the university student had, they planted an actor in with the group, and if the actor was dressed like an adult, or, you know, an adult, a professor or something, they were condescending on the environmental stuff, the student would stand up for the environment. But if the actor was dressed as a student and had the same condescending attitude towards the environment, the student was more likely to side with the student, with one of their peers, as opposed to taking a stand up against someone who they didn't see as being in their social circle, right? So even though it wasn't a friend, it was still a stranger in both cases. They still like altered their reality a little bit to adjust.
Yeah. So the specific study was in Humboldt, and they had a video interview of somebody talking about why it's important to protect the environment, and you should walk and use your bike as much as you can. And then in the video, they admitted to using a car, you know, maybe more than they should. So it's a little bit hypocritical. And the different study groups, you had a student watching the video, and then you had either the actor, who was supposedly another person, another stranger, but they were actually an actor, was either wearing like school gear and is young and kind of like in the same social group as the test subject. If they didn't say anything, or they just sort of like, yeah, I kind of drive too, and kind of admitted it, then the person's views on the environment, that was a social cue for them to maybe change their opinions of you know, maybe I don't need to be as strict. If other people like me are doing this, then maybe I don't need to beat myself up as much, you know, and that sort of thing. But when it was somebody else who was clearly not a student in a completely different sort of social circle, if they kept quiet, the person still said, you know what, if that person's admitting it, then maybe I don't need to try so hard. But if the person who was the outsider, you know, criticized and said, oh, what a hypocrite, that person says that they're all about the environment, all this stuff, but then they drive their car all the time. Well, then the test subjects got very defensive, and they actually went far stronger than the default of their own mode. They actually went into a much more defensive mode, defending these environmental values, and just in sort of like playing down the hypocrisy that the person said. And so what's really fascinating about that is when we think about our social groups, and you think about social media and things like that again, the algorithms tend to show us things that it thinks we like based upon our history. And so they create these echo chambers where people are all sort of following the same sort of political views or environmental views or whatever, and they're only seeing what other people like them are saying and commenting, and they may not see the more moderate views, or a close friend who has the opposing view, you know, that they like and they associate with, but they don't feel the same. That might make them think a little deeper, or be willing to admit that maybe they're not that maybe their original thoughts weren't as, they don't feel with so much conviction. But the social media tends to put those people in bubbles. And that's kind of a lot of the division that we're seeing, I think, in social media, and a lot of the stress that it causes.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Like, they called the phenomenon vicarious dissonance, and basically the idea is that if you see someone who is like you, and they have slightly different views from you, but you feel like you're like them, and you're going to subconsciously adjust your views so that you're more like them, right? And it's like a group mob mentality kind of thing, right? So the thing with social media is that if you see someone who doesn't have the same views as you, you just delete them, right? So you don't need to fight. You don't need to have that subconscious reaction, and like, you don't have to battle with, like, you know, subconsciously, am I friends with this person? We believe in such different things. Like, you just get rid of them, right? Which is not necessarily a good thing, because then you have all of this like selection bias in your circle, and you're not ever exposed to people with different thoughts or ideas from you, you know, which I think is dangerous, you know?
Yeah. And I think that the important takeaway from that is that you are being impacted by like things like social media. But again, even within your own social circles, you know, so if a lot of people at work are like celebrating, you know, getting totally hammered all the time and all this really bad behavior and not working out, and they're talking about it like it's positive, you may be trying to make a change, but there's that sort of stickiness or resistance you're getting from all the people around you. Another one I see a lot is in the home, right? When one spouse decides they want to make changes health and fitness wise, especially around diet, and then the other person is almost like purposely trying to derail them, or even just kind of like making comments, or that's going to change, well, I guess I can this time have this, or I guess I am being kind of extreme because that person so close to them is doing that. And this is why we see in the gyms, when people start hanging out with each other and we build this community around putting in the work, the concept of not going too hard, right? Like, it's not about killing yourself every single day. It's about showing up, doing quality work and having a little bit of fun. When that becomes part of the culture, then, and everybody's doing it, then you're more likely to do it because you're being affected by everybody else. But when the culture is like, get the highest score you can on the leaderboard, try to beat everybody, show up every day, and there's all this sort of peer pressure around these negative things, then people, that becomes the culture, and it's really hard to break that when, especially if that you're not supposed to be doing that. I thought it was interesting too, when this whole being attacked and kind of being criticized. And I think that was actually what happened a lot with sort of the growth of CrossFit, was that a lot of people were attacking CrossFit. So the Globo gyms, the bodybuilders, the powerlifters, everybody, the endurance people, everyone attacked CrossFit. Everyone, we were all the heretics when we were doing this back in the early days. And I think that really actually created almost even a more insulated bubble for the CrossFitters, and they became very aggressive about criticizing everybody else. And even instead of really looking at what people were saying, or really kind of using, again, their sort of slow thinking brain, then they just sort of like went with the party line, or just kept doing things the way that they used to do it 5 or 10 years ago, instead of analyzing, okay, well, maybe the programming, maybe we should have strength in a short Metcon and not just Metcon, one strength, nothing else, Metcon. Instead of thinking about those things, they were just still sort of caught in this, because their friends or other gyms were being attacked. They were becoming more and more feverish around sort of championing the party line. But the cognitive, or no, it was not cognitive dissonance, it was vicarious dissonance, was interesting. They researched sunblock use in Australia, and they found that, again, when people were more, I don't need to use sunblock, and the more that people did that, kind of spread, and less people would use sunblock. And then the groups of people who were really more aggressive about always wearing sunblock, then those people, it spread through the group where everyone was more adamant about always having sunblock. One other thing they mentioned too is they showed that, like, people talking like about the negatives of smoking or like the negatives of drinking, the next day would drink less, even if they went to a bar. So this effect lasts, beyond just the initial conversations, which I thought was another one. And then this last one I thought was really neat too, was when eating with other people, we tend to eat more, right? Because we're more focused on the other person than we are focused on, are we feeling full, or how much have I eaten? And so that's kind of interesting, because you think about the class environment. And one of the benefits of working out together in a group is that, if these other people are scaling, then it's okay for me to scale. I don't feel as bad when other people are doing it. Or when you're going hard and you kind of you just don't feel like it that day, but other people are showing up and they're putting in the work, you're more likely to put in the work, whether it's doing hard in a Metcon or practicing a skill, that sort of social pressure, that social validation is there when we train in a group, but we don't have that when we're training by ourselves. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that, Gigi?
No, I thought it was interesting. So it makes me wonder, if we have all these effects on the people around us and we're being affected by them, are there people who are affected more by the people around them, and are there people that are affected less by the people around them, right? And what is it? It's almost like an integrity thing, right? So if you define yourself and you know who you are, how hard is it to hang on to that, even though your friends group or your social circle might be swaying a little bit, right? So and who are the ultimate leaders, and how do you find those people? Because someone has to be the first person, right? Like there has to be someone around the world that says, I'm going to wear sunscreen. Sunscreen is important to me, and that's what I'm going to do. It's not an infinite loop, right? So kind of makes me wonder, like, and if you were to think about who you are within your social group or within the group of, those 5 people that influence us or whatever they say.
Yeah,
who
you're
are
the average.
you?
You're the average of the 5 or 10 people closest to you.
Yeah,
I think that's somewhat true, but then we end up with relationships and families and family members that are with us all the time. I think it's a personality. I think it depends on the people. Like there's different personality tests. You guys have heard me talk about the big 5, so personality tests, and the more sort of the less you care about other people's opinions. I think the more likely you are to sort of go off on your own. I think that people who are usually considered early adopters tend to be the ones to be the cause of change, when it comes to it. But I also think from a status situation, the people that people look up to, that you follow their lead, you're probably more impacted by somebody you look up to. Now, it might be a real person that or it could be somebody that through that's famous or that you follow on social media, that you could be sort of like pursuing. I think that it's beneficial to follow people like The Rock or Chris Hart or Mark Wahlberg. I'm just listening to the guys I follow. But these are really inspirational guys that have done amazing things, that are funny and work hard and have a great attitude about life, and filling your feed up with more of that sort of positivity, I think will help sort of combat some of the negativity. And then also taking the time yourself to post encouraging things, about your own life and things that you're working on, and also comment on other people's things when they're struggling or when they do something inspirational, give that feedback. I mean, I really do think that social media has the power to be this very, very effective tool to help people have better lives. It can make them, educate them, inspire them, and make them laugh, instead of it being sort of this negative thing. I think that a lot of people end up using it as a platform for negativity because they're unhappy or they feel bad about things, and so they'll break people down or they'll post negative things, either because they're trying to make themselves feel better. So if you knock someone down, then that kind of you are relatively higher than them, or you're looking for some sympathy. So you might be posting things because you want to feel like you're a victim. Whenever there's like a big emergency, like a fire or like some big emergency, people will post about like, oh, this crime happened in my town, or there was a fire nearby, I'm okay. And it's like that fire was 50 miles away. Like, but they're like, oh, poor me. Just catch yourself before you post that stuff. It's not really doing you any good. And then another time, I think but sometimes people try to post things that are negative, but they're trying to cause people to try to pay attention and take action because they feel passionate about that. And that's okay, but just make sure that what you're posting is true. You didn't just read the headline and click share. You actually went through and read the article, and did it make sense? And is it a real news source, or was there studies to back it up? And you're not just out, you have this immediate outrage, and so you hit share before you actually did your homework. But I would like to see a shift in the sort of the social media companies to try to like, we don't want to put this glossy shine on everything and cover up all the real stuff. But I do think that the more we can we can actually use it for good, and instead of dividing people in this us versus them mentality that we tend to see now, is to try to actually like blend it more so people see the different groups and different opinions, and expose people as much as we can to all these different ways of thinking and approaching the world, but then also put that positive spin on it. That's my rant.
Good rant. It was one of your longer ones, I must say.
But yeah, I think that's it for today. Check out the article. The link is in the description, and of course, like share this wherever you guys think where people can find a benefit. Think about that OODA Loop: observe, orient, decide, act. You can sit down and do a real quick 5-minute thing with yourself around some small part of your life that you're trying to change. If you're coaches, you can actually use this as a tool. Do it on the whiteboard and do it with the client. One thing that jumped in my mind I forgot to mention was it was just another example of the decide. Sometimes you'll say, I want to get my first pull-up. And so instead of just start practicing all these pull-up variations, all these drills, the actual this map and act might actually be change your diet, right? If you've got a lot of body weight to lose, you may get your pull-up a lot faster by dropping a few lbs than just trying to get stronger. We can do both, but yeah. So just try to think about that process and really taking into account each step when you work with people, or when you work with yourself, so that again, you're not just reacting, in a knee-jerk sort of manner. You're actually creating a real plan that you can sustain and that you can then correct on the next time around the circle. And then what do you want people to learn from this article?
Just to be more aware of how much we're influenced by the people around us, and to maybe understand yourself and what you stand for, Yeah,
definitely. Understanding yourself and realize that you can't stop it. You are being affected by the people around you. Obviously, you can try to limit the certain behaviors in people, but also don't beat yourself up. If sometimes if you're having these thoughts and you're kind of maybe you're not acting the way that you feel like you should, or whatever, just maybe step back, like we talked about, that 20,000 foot view, and say, like, why am I thinking this? Like, what is this really what's going on? Or is this, why do I think all of a sudden this is okay? Or did I really change it? Am I arguing with this person online or whatever because they attacked somebody that I like and that I associate with? Or is it, or do they have a valid point? Always use your extra level of thinking. Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow. Read the book. I've read it like 3 times. And I still have a lot to learn from it. All right, guys.
We're done.
That's it for today. Thanks a lot. Like, comment, subscribe, share. I think that's all of them. I'm starting to say that now because I sound like a real legit YouTuber. And thrive on. Say bye, Gigi.
Bye.